Hello, I'm Ray. I'm the co-founder at New Ventures. We are here on the newscast that we want to bring the news from the other parts of the world to Latin America and vice versa. And today I have awesome guest, Twwo. Can you introduce yourself, please, to the audience?
Perfect. Great. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Twwo. I'm currently the principal of SeedStars International Ventures. We're a global early stage venture capital fund investing in the emerging markets all around the world. And today I sit here in Bangkok with Ray, which is my home base.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So first question, I always like to hear about people's stories. So how did you end up in VC? What's your background?
Yep.
What have you done? So tell me a short version so people can get acquainted with you.
Definitely. So I initially had a very traditional financial background, right? Went to uni, studied finance, your summer internship at an investment bank, and was kind of trending in that route. But then before graduating, this was around 2016, 2017, the startup scene in Southeast Asia was really booming then, right? Just after the first wave of startups started to have some success, later stage funding, and then early stage activity was very vibrant.
When was that?
It was around 2017, 2018. Figured this is the future. Tech is only gonna get more prevalence in our lives and businesses. Might as well check it out. So initially got a job helping an accelerator from Singapore expand here to Thailand. And then did that for just over a year. And then I joined the 500 team here in Thailand for almost 4 years. So led most of the investments out of the second fund. And by the time I left, we had a portfolio of close to 100 companies.
100?
Yeah. And the majority of those were Thai startups as well, right? And I think at the time, according to one database, there was around 200 funded startups in the country. And we funded, almost half of them. So that was good visibility into the ecosystem.
A lot of data for your machine learning, right?
Yes, for my own little machine here. Yeah.
So for people that don't know Southeast Asia very well, so can you define what Southeast Asia is? There's also the definition of Asian countries, right? So what people use. So it's been 10 countries. Which are the most important one in the region? So just a quick overview on the region for the people that don't know the region well.
Yep, definitely. I think the distinction is important when you say Asia. It's huge, right? You have China in there. You have North Asia as well. Southeast Asia is a collection of, I don't know how many countries are in there, but mainly the major countries in Southeast Asia. You start with Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines. So those would be the majority of Southeast Asia.
Got it. The main markets for startups and tech.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about Thailand later. But how do you define those 6 markets? Indonesia, everybody knows it's a big country, Muslim country, but not a lot more. Thailand, people see Thailand as a tourist destination most of the time.
Yep.
Singapore is the hub for international companies, right? So if you can just summarize, the pros of or the main characteristics of each country, that would be cool.
Yeah, I think sometimes people from the outside or even people inside Southeast Asia, they see Southeast Asia as one homogeneous market, right? When in actuality is definitely not. There's very much pretty clear differences between each market. You speak different languages. It's unlike in LATAM where, you have 2 main languages. They're both kind of similar in some ways as well. The languages here are quite different cultures, different religions as well. So I would say, Singapore is a different beast, right? It's the financial hub. It's kind of the HQ of the region, but it's a very small market. So it's mostly regional companies coming out of Singapore.
It took the mantle from Hong Kong, right? A few years ago. It used to be Hong Kong, the main hub for startups, international companies. Now it's Singapore.
And for the Southeast Asia context, it's much closer than Hong Kong as well, right?
Of course, which is on East Asia.
Yeah. And so I would say Singapore, and then Malaysia and Thailand is has a higher GDP per capita, but the markets are a bit smaller. So a lot of the attention is going to markets like you said, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, where those three markets are growing much faster. So typically GDP growth rate is above 5%, whereas Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia below 5%. Although the emerging three, Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia, large population, younger population, the demographics, the key macro indicators look great, right? And that's where a lot of people are spending their attention or seeing the potential.
Sure. So would you say that's a fair assessment that Philippines, Indonesia, and what's the other one? Vietnam. Yeah, of course. I'm going there in 2 days. So these three markets are markets where there is a larger, let's say, low social income classes in these countries, and they are building the middle class, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So Thailand and Malaysia are a little bit richer, but smaller as markets. Yeah. And Singapore is very sophisticated, but too small as a market. I mean, it's powerful, but 6 million, right? If I'm not mistaken, the population of Singapore.
I think so. I don't know the exact numbers yet.
Yeah, I think I've been there. They told me this number. Anyway, we can correct that later.
But the interesting thing is there was a recent report that shows that even Singapore is small just because the capital is so concentrated there, right? A lot of the major tech companies like Grab, Singapore is still the main driver of their revenues, which was initially surprising to me, but when you look into it, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. So let's do one by one. So let's talk about the Philippines, right? Philippines was colonized by the Spanish a long time ago, then America. I think actually America wrote or the Constitution of the Philippines, fun fact, a long time ago. Very poor country, very divided, many islands, right? I mean, thousands of small islands, Muslim population in the south, Catholic in most of the country. What's the appeal of the Philippines? I know that in gaming a long time ago, I remember that a lot of gaming companies launched the games in the Philippines to test the gameplay because the culture is more westernized than other Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries. But still, and also, and there's still a lot of call centers and product support in the Philippines. But what you see going on there right now, I mean, in the Philippines?
Yep. No, I think you touched on a couple of very interesting points, right? Like culturally, they're very close to the US and the Western world, just given the previous influence. I think the appeal of the Philippines, the high level thesis is that they just have a very, very young population. The median age is in the 20s. And a large growing middle class, right? And a market that is in development, but maybe a couple of years behind the more developed countries in the region. So you still have I would say a lot of the low-hanging fruits are still there to be done, right? Especially on the consumer side, where you see this large group of people that is gradually earning more money. You can kind of predict where they're going to spend more of their disposable income, right? And you can just look at the other markets, similar markets around, what these markets have, what's doing well, and what's not available in the Philippines yet. And a lot of the local funds there are making, these bets, especially on the consumer side, betting on this rising middle class, right?
Got it. So, I mean, I know they love games over there, right? That's one of the reasons gaming companies tested their games over there. But how is the tech infrastructure in terms of payments and banking, etc.? Because one thing I've learned in the last 20 years is you need to build the tech infrastructure so other startups rise. Right?
You need to have the building blocks.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So in Brazil, this started to happen in the 2010s. Payments providers, infrastructure for logistics, for e-commerce, and so forth, so on. So would you say that the Philippines is building this infrastructure, or it's already there and it's ready to accommodate other companies?
No, I think definitely Philippines is still a nascent market. I would say in the development phase, right? And they have the added challenge in terms of logistics where the infrastructure is not as developed, and then with all, with the hundreds of islands, it's very hard to do e-commerce nationwide, right? So that's there. Payments on the consumer side, wallet adoption is pretty high, so that's kind of their main mode of payment. But on the business side, there's still a lot of friction. Online payment in terms of B2B is not as accepted or widely adopted as possible, and there's a few companies solving that. So if we say in general, Philippines is lagging a little bit behind some of their peers in the region.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I mean, for startups in Brazil mostly, but also in Latin America, trying to expand to the Philippines, what are the main difficulties? I mean, I guess most people we will deal with speak English. Of course, it's one of the official languages, right? Along Tagalog. But what would be the main challenges that you think? I mean, you've probably seen companies in the region expanding to the Philippines. What do you think that would be the main challenges over there? If you just say, oh, I want to, go there and see what's going on and build my business, what would you recommend? Yeah,
I mean, it depends on the companies that are expanding as well. But you're definitely right on the language piece, right? It's one of the few markets in Southeast Asia where you wouldn't really have a problem in terms of a language barrier. So that's one positive. But I would say still, right, it's not as easy as Singapore to set up a company.
So bureaucracy,
the bureaucracy is still there. Mm-hmm. In terms of doing business as well, like you still have to network and get to know the right people. As you know, a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia, you have these big conglomerates and families that are very powerful. I would say.
Like the Chaebol in Korea or the Keiretsu in Japan, right? In East Asia, I mean, they dominate the scene in many areas, right? I mean,
I mean, if you're going to build a large scale company, you're going to touch one of their, activities in some ways. And, either you work with them or you're trying to disrupt them, which I think is the interesting dynamic that we have here as well, right? Because if you want to build a large scale company, in the States, you talk a lot about disruption, but here, I mean, if you're disrupting the big players here, the dynamic is a little bit different, and you have a lot of startups that are supporting or serving these conglomerates rather than disrupting them.
I mean, the same thing actually happened in Latin America, Mexico specifically. There are large families that dominate media and e-commerce or retail. Or other verticals. In Brazil, I remember when Nubank was launched in 2013, everybody that was Brazil said, oh, there's no way for them to do anything in the Brazilian market because the big banks dominate the market. There were three.
It was concentrated. It wasn't fragmented.
Super concentrated, a big lobby. But they ended up being very successful. Nubank has, I think, more than, at the time of this recording, 105 million users.
And
Brazil.
Expanding still.
And expanding. They are also in Mexico and Colombia. So, I mean, I think there is a way, but it's very hard, and there needs to be capital, probably from the outside to help those companies, because I think some local.
I mean, if you're forced to take internal capital, they can kind of shape you in the way they want a little bit, right?
Which is the point. And how's the VC scene in the Philippines?
Can I just go back and ask you, curious to hear from your perspective how Nubank was able to navigate that, right? Just before coming here, I read an article on the Thai market specifically, and there's 3 digital banking license up for grabs. And all the major bidders are tied or related to one of these big companies, right? So that's kind of why I was curious to hear a bit more.
I think the story of Nubank is very interesting. David Valles is not a Brazilian. He's a Colombian/US. He's a Colombian national. He studied in the US. He came to Brazil as a Sequoia, partner for Brazil. He went to Brazil to open an office in São Paulo. And I remember talking to him when he was living in 2011 or 12. I don't recall very well, but he was there to invest and open a Sequoia fund specifically for Brazil and then Latin America. At the time, there were, as I said, we were talking about infrastructure. There was no infrastructure for a lot of stuff, including payments and etc. He struggled to find the companies that would fit the Sequoia playbook. Highly scalable companies that can make $10 billion or more in 15 years, 10 years, etc. And that become category defining companies. So ended up, because he studied a lot of the companies, seeing that there was a gap in banking. The big banks, they didn't care much about the, let's say, the lower middle class guys.
Just kind of the longer tail.
They didn't make them any money. Most of their money was made on credit and, loans,
the banks are profitable, they're making money, they're not, they don't have the urgency.
So, from what I recall, Nubank started with a credit card with no fees for the people that did not have a bank account. Or if they did, they were not using them.
It was a credit card.
Yeah, just a credit card or a debit card. I don't recall. But so they started to have a lot of traction because it was the first credit card where there were no fees, which sounds ridiculous today, right? The big banks, they charge like $100, $50 fees per year. That was a lot for those people. And they were very transparent, very friendly. He told you exactly what the fees were, rates, very upfront in the communication. So, they were serving a market that was not bankerized at the time. So that's how they started. They started with lower middle class, and then they built up their business. They launched the bank account, started to offer very good app. The bank didn't have any branches and offices, which was very new at the time. It was 100% online. The app worked very well. Their convenience and experience was great. Still is, for me, the best experience in the world that I've seen myself. And no, it just works. It's simple. It's friendly. It's not an asshole, bank. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, exactly.
I remember, what was a real revolution, but still so, they faced a lot of challenges.
I'm sure.
I think, I will invite Dave Vélez one day to speak on the podcast to tell the real story. That's what I've seen from the outside, which might not be accurate at all, but that's my perception. Yeah. So they basically served a market that was there. Nobody was interested on that market, and then they built the business up. Today they have full banking service, not full still. They have, they give you credit. You can deposit your salaries on the bank. You can have insurance. They have a lot of services. Still very simple and friendly. I think Pix, the payment system in Brazil, helped a lot. Nubank to become really popular. It was released in 2020. So Nubank was one of the first to adopt Pix, the instantaneous payment system, mandated by the government to replace the wire transfer. And then today they have a banking for small companies as well. So they are. I think it's just the beginning. Today Nubank is $70 billion in market cap at the time of this conversation. I think they will reach 500 billion. I think they will expand to other countries, and I think they might come to the US and might come to Southeast Asia. And they might.
Interesting.
And they have a lot of service to provide. They just acquired a company called Hyperplane in Silicon Valley that was using AI to make unstructured data into structured data to give better credit, to have better credit algorithms and stuff. They are very modern, very cool, very startup-ish like. So that's, I think, the story on my point of view.
Interesting.
Right.
And you mentioned the potential expansion into Southeast Asia, right? Like, Are there any previous cases of companies from LATAM expanding over to Southeast Asia?
There are a few. There are some companies like Bleep. It was called Take Bleep. They have a chat bot for WhatsApp using AI for customer service. They serve, I think, 28 countries in the world. They are in, I think they are in one of the countries in Southeast Asia. But no, I mean, that's the point of what we are doing at New Ventures. And, this podcast with you is tell people how South Asia is, because people don't know. Brazilians, they used to be very cognizant of the market in the US, of course, everybody is in the world, and Western Europe only.
Yep. But you guys have that proximity. You guys have that.
There is a proximity, historical proximity with Japan. There are millions of Japanese descendants in Brazil. The largest community of Japanese outside Japan is in Brazil these days. Now there are a lot of Koreans and Chinese. Yeah. So it's starting to change, but still very opaque. People don't even think about expanding to Asia. Oh, it's too complicated. Yeah. They speak different languages. They... different culture, etc. So I want to break this taboo because I think we are closer than we think culturally in terms of market. So that's
definitely. I mean, when internally in our fund, when we look at, when we're developing our thesis, doing some research, we look at these kind of leading indicators, right? Macroeconomic indicators, and you look at e-com penetration, kind of smartphone, internet penetration. A lot of these metrics, it looks very similar within Southeast Asia and LATAM.
Yes.
I think there's a lot to be learned from both regions, but I think just with the distance as well, we don't have that many people flowing through between each region, right?
No.
I mean, the flight is not an easy flight,
not easy
as you've experienced recently. So yeah, it's good to have this conversation in hopes of kind of fostering more.
Exactly. Just to clarify, the opportunities, the pros and cons, so people know there is a market and might be, I mean, size-wise, I think the regions are roughly the same size if you count South America. With Mexico, I think Latin America is a little bit bigger. But it's North America technically, although people put it in Latin America culturally, right?
Yep.
But so I think, I mean, there are opportunities. As you said, it's growing. The population of these countries will grow. So let's go to Indonesia, right? Very unknown. I think Philippines people still know. Thailand, of course, people know. Vietnam people know because of past.
People might know Bali, right?
Yeah, Bali and but Bali is not Indonesia, right? I mean, it is not. It's a different beast. But so, what can you say about Indonesia in general? 300 million people or more, right? I mean, roughly 300 million people. Muslim majority country. A lot of islands as well over there. So, what can you say about Indonesia?
So, I think if you're in Southeast Asia, most of the time you cannot ignore Indonesia, right? Just because of the size. If you talk to most funds around here, either Indonesia is their main market or is coming as a second, close second, just because the sheer size of the market. Internally, our portfolio, majority of companies are either regional companies, out of Singapore, a little bit here out of Thailand or Malaysia. But then the other half are mainly companies in Indonesia that are, by and large, just targeting their domestic market. And I think they're the only country in Southeast Asia where founders can just first think about their home market, and that would be big enough for VCs, right? Which I think is slightly different from Latin America, where you have larger markets like Mexico and Brazil. So in Southeast Asia, if you're not in Indonesia, you have to be regional. Otherwise, it's too small for VCs to make returns.
They have their own Uber, right? I mean, Gojek, right?
Which merged with Tokopedia, which is e-com play. So a lot happening there. I think obviously some challenges and hiccups along the way, but the long-term picture is still bullish. Apart from Singapore, I think the venture capital scene in Indonesia is most active. I think they have around 50 to 60 active funds around. Really? Say in Thailand or Philippines, we might maybe have 10, 15 at best.
Got it. It's more family offices or high net worth individuals, not necessarily professional VCs, right? I mean, there is money on those other countries, Thailand and Philippines, but
it's not as professionalized. They started the ecosystem a bit before markets like Indonesia as well. So they've kind of completed their first life cycle, right? You have companies starting, a few companies IPO'd. You're seeing some recycling of talent, of capital as well. So you're seeing, ex-Gojek, ex-Tokopedia employees starting new companies and in the angel investing.
Yeah, this is super important, that the successful people invest back in the ecosystem. That's the only way I know that things start to work. So Indonesia, they don't speak English. Probably a lot of bureaucracy as well, right? Similar to the Philippines or Brazil a long time ago, or Mexico even today. What are the main challenges that companies face from the outside when expanding to Indonesia?
I think when people are thinking about expanding into Indonesia, it's just that the local market is strong, right? In some of the other markets where the tech scene isn't as developed, you would have certain spaces where you're not really competing with anyone, right? But in Indonesia, in most spaces, you would either have a local competitor already, funded by a local fund which has the networks and the connections. So I think that is one. English proficiency, I don't think is as bad as some people might think. I think it's generally at a similar level to Thailand from my experience. Some people say Thailand is a bit better, but I think it's kind of in and around the same area. Bureaucracy, I think, apart from Singapore, you still face it in most markets in Southeast Asia.
Do they hire engineers in Indonesia, or they outsource to Vietnam or the other places?
There's a decent amount of engineers in Indonesia, but I wouldn't say that's kind of their core strength, right? So we would have teams that are hiring internationally, with the local Indonesian team as well. So if you have certain requirements that you need, developers or engineers to be a bit closer to the customers, to maybe, talk to the customers, be a bit more understanding of the local nuances. And then you complement that with, if you need an AI or ML engineer, you might find it more effective to hire in India. So we have a lot of teams that are building this distributed hybrid tech teams, if you India, say.
Because it's more advanced in startups, in tech, provides a lot of talent also to Southeast Asian countries, right? I noticed that talking to some founders here. And they have or import or outsource, have a team there in Bangalore or other countries or other cities in India. So Vietnam. So most people know Vietnam from, unfortunately, the war, right? It's a communist country. Technically, like China, I say it's not really communist, right? But it is. There's a communist party. But I was surprised to hear during this trip that Vietnam has a lot of good engineers. It started 20 years ago. Government pushed. My impression. I mean, I've been there as a tourist a couple of times, but I will be there to see the scene. But my impression is that Vietnam has a little bit of the hunger of China, 20 years ago. They want to be...
They're like a mini replica of China.
So what do you say about Vietnam?
So, I mean, I think the first thing is we don't have as much experience in Vietnam. We haven't made any investments there yet, although we've looked at a few opportunities where we're close to it. I think part of the reason is that, as you said, right, they're kind of technically a communist country, just opened up not too long ago. So culturally and how people operate is, for me, from my perspective, it's slightly more different than the other Southeast Asian markets. So if I go to Singapore, I go to Indonesia or the Philippines, you can just land at the airport and you fit in nicely. It's kind of very much a similar vibe. Whereas in Vietnam, I think they do things slightly differently. The people who have influence there is also a different group of people, just by the way they're governed. But the energy in the market is great. You can tell like they're definitely going somewhere. And fortunate for them, unfortunate for us in Thailand. Like the GDP is catching up to us very fast. As you said, tech talent there is strong. You even have big banks here that are setting up development houses, hiring thousands of engineers in Vietnam. That goes
in the
to
big cities or the countryside?
I don't know where they are, but I just know that they're, setting up centers there and hiring there. So that goes to show that, that's one of the advantages that they have. The other one is the kind of proximity and the relationship that they have with China.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they were influenced a lot by China and then France, right?
Yep.
And then the US in a way, which is a very interesting relationship. You know, it's although they won the war and etc., they still are friends with the US.
They're still very friendly. Yeah.
With the US. So it's
there doesn't seem to be a kind of a negative or an aggressive sentiment towards
which I experienced there. I mean, people are different from governments also, right? I mean, everywhere. So it doesn't matter what happens among the governments. People are very good people everywhere. So, okay. So
can I ask you a question? Sure. Like in Southeast Asia, I mean, before we were on air, you were talking a little bit earlier about keeping up with a lot of the geopolitical stuff that's going on as well. In Southeast Asia, you would see most countries are trying to balance both sides. You would have maybe Philippines is a bit closer to the States, Vietnam more so to China. The rest would trying to be friends with both. What's the situation in LATAM and how is that different?
No, that's a good question. Mexico, by definition, it's very close to the US until this new administration, which is putting tariffs on them and etc. So I see a movement of them trying to distance or work out something with the US, right? But I mean, Mexico is very influenced by the US, mostly. It's very close.
To be
they have a saying there. They say we are very far from God, but so close to the United States. So I mean, trade and factories, outsourcing, and people in the US spend their vacations there. So Mexico is very well known, much more well known than Brazil in the US, because people know the culture. They spend their vacations there. They do business.
You also have a lot of Mexicans in the States.
Yes, exactly. It's 50 million Latinos. Most are Mexicans in the US. So I think, Mexico is, I would say, 80%, 90% influenced by the US and was friendly with the US so far. I don't know what's going to happen now on, because this administration is not friendly with anyone. Trump administration. Brazil is strange. So we love the culture from the US, but we think we are Europeans culturally. Right. So there's also a big immigration from Italy and Portugal for obvious reasons. Portugal colonized Brazil. So we like Western Europe. We travel to Western Europe. We know very well Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, we don't know very well Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary. It's like
it's foreign to you.
It's foreign to us. But culturally and in terms of habits in tech or consumer, it's US.
Okay.
We love US products. There are a few European products that are successful in Brazil because there are a few European products in tech in general. Spotify is the exception. EDN, the payment system from the Netherlands. I think Booking from the Netherlands as well was acquired by a US company. So there are a few, but mostly US. The habits, the way that we consume products, very US centric.
And when you talk about expansion, right? Like, because you said maybe companies in LATAM should maybe get to know Southeast Asia a little bit better, explore opportunities there. But is there a lot of expansion from LATAM startups into the US as well?
There is a lot more, although it's much more difficult. There are just a few that succeeded. Some of them, they transferred their headquarters to the US.
But that's...
Yeah, there's examples of Gympass, which now became a well hub.
But is it more just because competition or just like...
It's the big market, right? In the US. People see the US as, that big opportunity, but they forget that the bigger the opportunity, the more competition you will have from all around the world. The US is very open, right? So I advise founders from Brazil or even Southeast Asia, if you will, don't go to the West without raising a lot of money because it's easier. It looks easier to start.
Yep.
It's friendly. There's no bureaucracy.
Yeah.
You know, it's straightforward. You have answers in one email, one line.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's move forward or not.
Yeah.
But the competition is huge. And as in most categories of tech or subcategories of tech,
Yeah.
you have only space for 3 winners, you know, mostly.
Yeah.
So either you are very well financed and you have US funds in your cap table, preferably. If you want to succeed in the US, it's very difficult. Very, extremely difficult. But there are examples of Brazilian companies that expanded to US and Western Europe more than they did to Asia, Asia is too big. East Asia, Japan, Korea, China, and Taiwan and Hong Kong, or Southeast Asia, right? And South Asia, India and Pakistan and those countries, Bangladesh and etc. I think you need a lot of funding because it's expensive. I mean, hiring an engineer in the US, it's like 300,000 a year.
Yeah, you can hire a small team.
If you want to hire a top AI engineer, it's $1 million these days.
That's your whole seed round around here.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to hire a VP of sales for doing B2B, that person will cost $500K in New York or the Bay Area, you know, with bonuses and etc. So, and then you need to convince them they need to work for you. A foreigner arriving there, these guys have opportunities everywhere. So the cost of opportunity is very high. There are few, and I think one of the ideas for me to do this trip through 11 countries and 20 cities is that Brazilian founders are going global now. You know, still very few of them, but they are. Yeah, you know,
it's a start, right?
Yeah, exactly. There are IPOs. There are companies now present in many countries, and so forth, so on. So. Just to continue on the Vietnam. So any advice for people trying to do business in Vietnam?
Vietnam, I think you definitely need to find a good local partner or somebody who can help guide you through, right? I don't think
China.
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy place
to
just drop in.
It's more like China than Southeast Asia in a way, culturally.
In some ways, yeah. And especially in terms of in doing business as well, right? I think it is very important to kind of have, you know, either a local head or local partners to guide you through all the little nuances, right?
Yeah, they're not written most of the time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So last, Singapore, I think everybody knows it's easy. Yeah. So Malaysia. So I lived in Malaysia for 7 months in KL a long time ago. People speak English and Chinese, part of the population, right? It's English everywhere.
Yep.
More westernized in a way, but at the same time it's Muslim majority. So what do you say about Malaysia? Malaysia, in my opinion, looking back 10 years ago, I think was one of the biggest potentials in Southeast Asia. But people have told me that they did not fulfill that potential. Is that a right assessment, or what do you think about it?
It's hard for me to say, but I think they get slightly overshadowed by Singapore, right? Just because it's just so close, and you have some companies starting off in Malaysia, but once they get to a certain scale, they just move
like
over.
Grab.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking about, right? So we personally, I haven't been focusing on Malaysia in the last few years just because Southeast Asia, there's a lot of markets to cover already. And I think generally if you go to Singapore and you look at Singapore, you get a bit of that exposure to Malaysia anyway. Within Malaysia, I think there's a couple of active funds around, but a lot of the funds are also backed or related by the government as well. Yes. So, when you have that relationship, how you operate is also slightly different.
It's not 100% independent, right?
Yeah.
In a way.
So what's also the kind of breakdown in terms of funds in Brazil, right? Like government backed, CVCs, VCs. What would you say would be the kind of rough breakdown there?
Well, most are CVCs.
Majority?
Yeah.
Okay.
Majority. I don't have the numbers here in my head, but at least half. Every single company that you can think about has a CVC.
And do they actually are active in doing investments?
Well, that's the point I wanted to mention. So some announce their CVCs, we want to innovate, invest in startups.
Yep.
Most of them either do not deploy or they close after a change in upper management. Okay. Right? Oh, it's not a priority for us right now. So or do not do good investments, in my opinion. There are some that are very sophisticated. One that I can mention by name because we are co-investors, Cortex. This is the fund of the diagnostics, the biggest diagnostics lab in Brazil, similar to Quest Diagnostics in the US. It's called Cortex. The guy that managed the fund, Kavenagi, he's super modern, super, independent in a way. Their biggest LPs are a bank and a lab and etc. But he managed to do it really well. Nice. Super founder friendly, open-minded, understands the game. So more funds like Cortex probably will be developed. And after this crisis of 2022, the bubble, I think the ones that stay will be very, very good. So I would say when you become independent, you become a VC, not a CVC. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like Qualcomm Ventures. One day they were Qualcomm Ventures. They used the balance sheet of Qualcomm to invest. Today they are independent fund. Still, they want some correlation with Qualcomm, but they are very independent. Intel Capital was the same, right? Google has 4 funds, very independent. Sometimes they invest in competitors of Google, right? Yeah. So I think all the CVCs, if they're very successful, they will become a VCs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I forgot. Thailand, of course. What can you say about your own country? Besides having lovely people, great food, smart people everywhere, more international than people think, right? Because of tourism, a lot of people study in the US or
tourism, a huge expat population as well.
Yes, exactly. There are a lot of expats in Thailand right now. I think
it's around 20% of the population in Bangkok, if I'm not mistaken.
Really?
Yeah.
So what can you say about Thailand?
I think Thailand has its own challenges. I think we're quite reliant on tourism as well, but we have so much I think strengths and positives that we can capitalize on, but in some ways we're not doing ourselves a favor as well in terms of how we do certain things, right? I think overall Thailand is quite digitized. You spend a few days here around Bangkok. It's a modern city.
Yes.
Quality of life is great, but in terms of tech and startup, we're not as competitive as obviously Indonesia or Singapore. We have a couple companies that are doing well. I know a couple of the kind of first generation of startups are prepping for an IPO. So hopefully that brings back the attention to the Thai market.
Where do they IPO generally here in the region?
Will be here in
Thailand.
In the Thai market. The Thai stock market is pretty active and liquid.
Really?
If I'm not mistaken, the trading volume is even higher than the market in Singapore. Average daily trading.
But they
volume.
generally IPO in their own countries, or they go to Hong Kong or Singapore or Nasdaq? or you have all sorts of
Thai companies would generally IPO here. Most companies would not have the scale to IPO at Nasdaq, and a lot of the even Southeast Asian companies that have done that, the price performance hasn't been
they did when
hasn't been ideal.
Market was up. Same in Brazil or Latin America. So Thai working culture. If you want to do business in Thailand, what should you know about the working culture here? Because personally, I think probably the top 3 most amazing people in the world: friendly, nice, polite. Business-wise, I have no idea how are Thais. I have some meetings here, but most people I meet are more international in a way.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But if I come here as a foreigner or anyone, what should you do?
Okay.
Besides not putting your feet on the table. Which I've learned.
I think traditionally, like the business culture, the culture in general is very much based on seniority. So we defer a lot of kind of decision making to the most senior people in the room, right? So
Confucian influence system, right?
Yeah. And then sometimes it's people aren't as direct as you guys are in the West, right? So
in Brazil, we are not as well.
Okay.
We always joke that Thailand is the Brazil of Asia. For a lot of cultural similarities, people are happy, smile, very welcoming. But another thing that's very common is we have a great meeting. People don't tell you what they really think.
Yeah.
São Paulo, better, a little bit more like the US, but in most Brazil is they try to be nice, but they don't tell you.
They just ghost you after or whatever. Yeah. So it's somewhat similar, but then again, it's very different because you have the more kind of traditional people in business, but then you also have this new age where it's more international. They're working with foreigners as well. So there's a bit of a hybrid. And when you look at the startup ecosystem itself, you would often have events where it would be 90% locals, and you go to another event, it would be, majority expats. Right. And sometimes the kind of two groups don't mix, which I don't think is a good thing. And I think today we're seeing more of that. So we have people running like the event you will be at tomorrow. I think it will be a good mix of both expats and locals, and the way things are conducted will be done a bit more internationally, but still with a Thai twist, I would say.
Yeah, probably Thailand is like a Rio in Brazil, very international because of tourism, right? Yeah. So, I mean, people know they speak English better than other cities because they need to survive and etc. But still, business culture is very different from what you see as a tourist, which is actually, I mean, every country, right?
I think the friendliness can kind of sometimes backfire as well, because people here can sometimes be a bit more laid back than, if you go to Singapore or Vietnam, you see more intentionality in how they go about things, right? Like
more ambition.
You can just sense it. If you're in the city center in Singapore during the day, you see people walking by.
Yes.
They're fast. They're like they're just
how
there
fast
to, like,
they walk. It's a thermometer.
They're just there to do work. I mean,
if
you go in the city center, in Bangkok today, you just see people just chilling in the coffee shops. They're a bit more laid back, I would say.
Yeah, like Rio, the same thing, right? It's a touristic city, beautiful, and a lot of people coming. So, in terms of in general, just to go to the last part of our conversation, the culture, can I say that the culture in most Southeast Asia is very wary of taking risks. So they don't like risks at all, as is in most parts of the world. Or there is now in the new generation, more people or trying to, to become entrepreneurs because they're unsatisfied with the banks or with the, whatever, the companies in general. How do you see the generational change here? Risk is still a big problem because this is in most of the world, not outside the US.
Yes.
In China, actually, they do not like risks, but they risk a lot. It has changed a lot as well. So what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's similar to what you said, right? Like risk appetite is nowhere near comparable to, what you have in the States. You would still have a very small group of people who study in the States, maybe work there for a couple of years, and they come back, they get ingrained in that culture, right? In terms of tech specifically, I think it's becoming a bit more accepted in Asian cultures as well. The parents have a lot of influence, right? Yes. So if you take it back,
if you're not a doctor and studied at Harvard, you are a failure, right? Kind of.
Yeah. But then, if you were to work at a startup, 7, 8, 9 years ago, a lot of people still would not know what a startup is. They see it as risky and whatnot. But then today, when you have kind of the first batch of companies scaling to unicorn levels, you see Grab everywhere. People are using e-commerce. There's a bit more understanding and acceptance. They see the potential. So it's not viewed as risky as what it was, back in the days. I don't think a lot of the young graduates are ready to start companies as well, right? So I think the majority of the founders in my portfolio, they're in their 30s or 40s. And maybe we have one or two who are in their 20s. And that might have to do with kind of the risk-taking appetite, but also just quality of education in the universities as well.
And the safety net also, right? If they do not want to, I mean, the pressure from family is big, right? So if you are not paying the bills or etc., I mean, you are in trouble.
And it's not as easy to raise capital
Yes.
here, right? So that's also the other issue. You have a lot of entrepreneurship, I would say, but they might just not be starting tech companies.
Yeah, like more lifestyle businesses, right? I mean, people are very
There's nothing wrong with that, right?
No, nothing. I mean, I always tell people, you need to decide if you go to the lifestyle business or the VC route. I would actually advise people to go lifestyle business most of the time, you know, because different laws of physics, right? VC is not for everyone.
VC is very binary, right?
Yes,
like either you're a big success or it doesn't
you invest
work.
properly, not in a good business, right? You can build great businesses without VC money. So probably won't be as influential as a VC-backed business. So you need to choose your path.
I think to your point, right? It's not just the level of risk appetite, but it's the level of ambition as well. A lot of people haven't even grasped the scale of companies that are being built in the US, right? Like, if you bring out a number of $1 billion here and translate it to the local currency, that's a huge, it's a big number already, right?
33 or
34
billion baht.
Yeah. So some people, they wouldn't even think up to that scale, right? If they get a $10 million business, that's, you know, that can buy you a
great
1%
lifestyle.
life here already.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the challenge. I think, you know, with these geopolitical changes, US becoming more centered on itself and China is already centered on itself. I think these regions, all the rest of the regions need to unite. I mean, we are 50% of the economy, right? In all these regions, in Southeast Asia,
just
East Asia.
fostering more trade, just being less reliant on these two giants, right?
So that's why I want to break the taboos. And so if a startup comes here from Brazil or Mexico or Colombia, whatever, would local VCs invest on them? If so, at what stage do you think? So I will give an example. We have, let's say, a company that's making $3 million in Brazil. Okay, a logistics company. They're still small. The opportunities there can be huge, and they should focus in Brazil. But maybe on Series B, they might want to expand or to Southeast Asia or East Asia or the Middle East. Let's talk about Southeast Asia. So would local VCs, they would invest in this company? It's better to be invested in the beginning if they want to expand to Southeast Asia, or if they need already to have a lot of success in Brazil to be invested? Because I'm talking about that just because I think local VCs could help them to open markets and doors.
Just speeds up the process, right?
Exactly. You know, so would you think that culturally, in any country, you know, like Indonesia or here or, you know, Vietnam, would they want a proof of success in Brazil before investing, or maybe they can come earlier? Like
I can't speak for other VCs, but I generally would think they would need a level of validation in the local market, right? Because I think it's tough for a lot of the VCs here to justify it to their IC or the LPs as well of why are you investing in.
So most VCs here want to invest in the local market and have success here.
But that's their mandate as well.
Yeah, so that's my point. Yes, that's their mandate of most VCs.
Yeah, I can see it happening more at the later stage, especially with some of the strategics, family offices, or these kind of CVC
sovereign
types.
funds.
Yeah, although from what I know, there's only been a very small handful of funds that are now active in Southeast Asia and are expanding to LATAM. So I think we're one. Saison Capital just recently expanded into LATAM as well. I think
Japanese.
Yeah, so they're very active in Southeast Asia, and although they're
mostly fintech, right?
Mostly fintech, Web3 as well. But it was interesting to see them, making the expansion there.
My theory is, regions are kind of in the back burner, and there are a lot of opportunities to invest in these regions that most people don't know very well, in both sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Both Latin American.
So that's what we did internally as well. I mean, we have a company that recently raised a Series B here. And my colleague in LATAM was looking at a similar company in the region that is still at pre-seed, right? So we can kind of translate some of that learnings, and who knows, potentially in the future, what could happen.
Yeah, because I mean,
two companies, right?
we ourselves, I mean, we would be willing to try, even at a smaller, in the earlier stages, right? But I think most in both sides will be only willing to invest when the company's already big, and we can help you on this region, right?
I mean, regional expansion is difficult enough within your own region at the early stage, right?
Yes.
So
but my rationale is you're absolutely right. But why it should be? Because I think launching in any country is very difficult.
Yep.
We tend to think because it's closer to us, it's easier. I don't think so. I think maybe a company launching, let's say, instead on the Philippines, they could launch in Mexico, Brazil. Will be as difficult as in the Philippines. Of course, the language is different, but most people that you will deal with will speak English anyway.
Yeah.
But maybe the upside is much bigger, and vice versa, right? Instead of launching, let's say in Colombia, which is, let's say 1/10 of Brazil potential market, I could launch in Indonesia. I want to challenge these assumptions, because these assumptions were made because it's easier to think that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've lived in Mexico.
Yeah.
Most Brazilian startups were not successful in Mexico at all. They basically were destroyed by the local market, although it seems very close. Culturally, Mexico and Brazil are very close. Language is different, but it's not about the language or the cultural similarities. It's about, going to a different market. So, the same thing with Japan or Korea. I mean, people don't think, I'll never be able to launch in Japan, etc. Well, maybe you can, So I want to challenge these assumptions. I don't know if I'm right or not, but it's difficult anyway. Any country that you go, it's very difficult to establish. So why don't think big?
Like optimize for kind of market potential instead.
Upside. Okay, if I go well in Indonesia, I mean, could be the size of Brazil, and depending on the industry, of course, right? Yeah. So so to finish, do you want to talk about any unfair stereotypes or things that people think they know about the region, but they don't, or maybe they're not being accurate enough, because sometimes we have stereotypes, right? Which, I mean, generally are bad most of the time, but most of them, they're true as well, you know? What can you tell the audience about, the region itself that maybe people don't know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we're talking about people who've not kind of have a lot of experience with Asia overall, I think the region is, you would just classify people, you say, this is an Asian guy, right? But if you look down to it, like there's so many differences within the region, just within Southeast Asia alone, that I think is quite fascinating. I would just encourage people to do what you did, right? Just visit, get to know the people, learn about the culture, and enjoy some of the good food and nice places that we have. I think the other piece is that, Thailand or, Bali in Indonesia, it's not just a place where you go and chill at the beach, right? Like there's actual innovation happening, digitization is happening, and there's actual real business potential in the region, and people are building.
Cool peaks, right? You told me. I mean, people think Brazil is the only country that have.
I think we implemented it at a similar time to you guys. I remember they were talking about it back in 2016.
Yes. Pix was launched officially in November 2020.
Okay.
But maybe you implemented before, and a lot of people have no idea, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know. I mean, I tend to think I'm very well informed, but I cannot be informed about all the countries.
Yep.
So I think the best way is exactly doing what I'm doing, which is going, meeting people.
I actually see as well. I mean, like in parts of cities in Bangkok, Jakarta, or whatever, it's up there with the most modern cities globally around the world, right?
Exactly. We are. It's a global city, as São Paulo or Tokyo or Shanghai or London. It's the same. So anything you want to know about Brazil as well? Misconceptions? I can answer that as well.
Yeah. We can have that conversation
Yeah.
after, right? Yeah.
So, in general, I think people always think about Brazil on the size of the market, but still the majority of, not the majority, but I would say, yeah, the majority of the population is still not very rich to consume products, which is...
But GDP per capita is
11,000. I mean, which is, Thailand is 8, right?
Thailand is around 7, 8. Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam is much significantly less than Thailand, right?
Yes.
So even when you say that for Brazil, I'm just looking in Southeast Asia.
And Singapore is like 90 or something, right?
Yeah.
Super rich, but also a very small population. So I think, there are very good, also another misconception, very, very good and sophisticated founders, product people, UX, engineers or designers, and the UI designers, because products in Brazil, they need to be made for a population that is not very well, it's not very sophisticated at the most, So the interfaces of the apps, the ease of use are amazing. I mean, when I go to Japan and see some of the interfaces they have, it's very hard to use. That's something that Brazil could excel. For everyone, even in Southeast Asia. So I think people got really good at product, and I think they learned a lot from Silicon Valley culture more than European culture, which is very slow in terms of startups these days. The people, 5% of the founders in Brazil are very sophisticated. That's a surprise for me as well, because I lived outside Brazil for 16 years. I didn't, see the evolution. When I went back, I was surprised.
Seeing them in higher volumes.
Yes, definitely. There's a density of startups that I didn't believe I would find in Brazil. That's why I did not start a fund in Brazil 10 years ago or more. Good for the people that started a fund 10, 15 years ago.
There's still a lot of opportunities ahead.
There are, and specifically the gap in Brazil, which my, let's say, beginner opinion here is it was in the late stage that was covered, and then the market crashed, and then now the early stage needs more good VCs like yourself, right? So I think now both regions have a gap between pre-seed and Series A. There's a lot of money after Series A or B, etc.
Exactly.
It's not a problem anymore. But to reach Series A, you need to invest in people, not in businesses, because founders are the ones who will make it, right? So, cool, man. Okay, so we are finishing. Thank you so much for watching. Catch us in the next newscast. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ray.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure.